सब में सभी खो जाए सब में सभी रो जाए सब में सभी खो जाए सब में सभी रो जाए लाली का लगवाए से आगे चल ये दिल कहे ये वापस है तेरा तू गाने आज ये गीत मेरा संगीत ऐसे गीतों सोच के सभी है खुदा मैं हूँ Soundbox की ही प्रकार मैं हूँ वॉल का मैं ही सुबह सब दर्द का मैं हूँ दवा मैं हूँ Soundbox में डरता नहीं मैं सबसे आगे मैं आज़ादी मैं हूँ हिंदुस्तानी मैं rock and roll Samaki step.
Hi guys, welcome to Future Sound of Bengal episode 2. We have today with us in the studio the one and only Nabarun Bose. Hi Nabarun, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. So far so good. Hope you're well.
Yes, thanks for asking. I'm doing great. Okay, so Naba, we are kind of connecting after how many years?
I think it's been around 15 years. Yeah,
15 years,
I
right?
think so. Yeah, almost 2 decades.
Yeah, lot has changed in these 2 decades, obviously.
Yes, indeed. Actually, while I was coming here today in my car, this entire place, this entire neighborhood has changed so much in the last 15 years that, I was quite surprised. I didn't know what to think, whether to be happy about it or sad. I mean, I'm obviously happy that it looks very nice that this entire neighborhood right now, there are a lot of new apartments and stuff, but I'm also a little sad that this is sort of a realization that we are getting old.
Yes, we are getting old, and I think a lot of flats have happened, which is a general thing, obviously. It's not only to this neighborhood, but lot of flats we are getting nuclear, that is what has happened. And but musically I think we have become more global, right? Previously, right now, jaise what kind of music we used to kind of listen to and the kind of stuff we used to do, I think what it has helped over the years, the connectivity.
Absolutely.
And everything that has
there's a lot of exposure nowadays which was not there 15 years ago. We had to actually look for the discographies of our favorite bands, and we had to go to certain places like Free School Street,
right?
And we used to buy those cheap pirated CDs because nothing else was available at those point of time.
Correct.
But now actually there's so much of exposure. You can actually go online on any streaming service and listen to all the songs made by your favorite artists, which is a great thing, I would say.
Absolutely. क्या नाम था वो बंदे का छोटू is that the shop is still there?
Chowdhury. I don't know. I haven't been there in a long time. It's probably still there, but what I heard 3 or 4 years back that he's selling a lot more merchandise these days, like t-shirts and mugs and stuff like that. But I don't think people buys a lot of CDs anymore from there because those are anyway available right now.
Correct. Now I remember a lot of t-shirts, I used to have a lot of black t-shirts and some band ka t-shirts, right. And from there I used to get, and if you see here I still have these posters and all around. I don't know if the camera can point out yahan pe, because today I am operating one man show here, so but still I'm sure we'll kind of show that one day. But yeah, coming back to the origins. So Nova, we'll start right now. So I'm sure our viewers know who you are. However, when Noah was not a music producer and a music director, he started very early with his music, and I know a bit of it, and won't kind of say I know everything about that. What I know is that the part of the Bangla band circuit and everything, when he used to kind of play with his band called Lokayat. From there I knew him. So Nabarun, if you can just tell us something about your journey.
Yeah, since we started this entire conversation with a trip down memory lane, I think we can stay then in that lane for some time more. So even that time when we were growing up, we were fresh out of school into college. At that point of time, the Bengali rock music scene was so popular here. I mean, you could switch on the radio channel and every hour at least 3 or 4 new band songs would be played. I mean, I remember the first time I heard Fossils was on the radio in a show called Dil Se by Jimmy Tengri, which used to happen, I think, in the Saturday evening. So there's this FM boom that happened at that point of time. A lot of private FM channels grew up, and the Bengali band music was really popular, and it was inspiring a lot of young people like us, who were musicians and who had friends who were musicians, to form bands. So I started this journey with a band actually at that point of time. My first band was Nishkromon actually, and then I was a part of a band called Lokayat, and we used to go to a lot of competitions, and there would be a lot of fests happening at that point of time. You and your band Unix were almost a part of every competition that we used to go to, because we were contemporaries. I started off as fully a band person, a guy who loves music and who loves rock music, like many of us at that point of time. And that's how I pretty much started this journey with the keyboards. And then eventually, when I got a little more serious about this music, I decided to take some serious lessons. So I started taking lessons from Savida, and then later on I went to Indroda. And while I was learning from Savida, Shobhik Gupta, who is also a very well-known music director now, at that point of time, Savida used to send me for different studio sessions, which he would be missing out on. Probably he has some other work that day. So, but a studio session has come up, so he would send me. And in that way, I started gathering, knowledge about studio recordings and how to play in the studio. There's a lot of difference in the way you approach playing music in a live scenario and the way you approach music in a studio scenario. So I started learning those little things while I was still in college. So gradually I became a part of other different bands like Colors and eventually Crystal Grass, and I used to play at some places for quite some time, for quite a few years. So all of these things contributed to the sense of production and the sense of music that I bring to the table now.
Okay, that's great to hear. Just a bit inquisitive. Did you have any kind of Indian classical roots or anything in Indian kind of contemporary kuch roots?
See, actually, I've come from a family where music is very much appreciated. My mother is an Indian classical singer, Vidushi Suranjana Bose, and so I grew up in a house where music was happening almost all the time, because my mother used to have a little music school on the first floor of our house, and regularly she would hold classes almost every day. And so I pretty much grew up listening to classical music all the time in my house. And when I was very young, I also took lessons from my mother. And when I grew up a little, I started learning the sitar. I started learning the sitar from Pandit Kushal Das. And I took lessons for quite a few years, actually, around 5 to 6 years. But eventually, at that point of time, I was very restless. I was a very restless kind of a child, and at that point I was also bitten by the bug of rock and roll. So eventually I wanted, I could relate more to the sound of distortion and the sound of heavy drums playing. So gradually around the 9th standard, I think, I started feeling this need for playing some kind of a Western instrument so that I can play rock. So because I was crazy about rock music at that point of time, I mean, at our place, this was there was a very contradictory thing going on, because if you went into our house, on the ground floor you would hear these beautiful melodies being sung by my mother's students. They were probably doing a riwaz on Yaman or Bhairav, and as you moved up the house you could start hearing distortion, and you could start hearing Nirvana and Metallica and Guns N' Roses, and things would start getting a little chaotic as you moved to the second floor of the house. So that was there. And when I started playing the keyboards, it was my grandma actually. My grandma used to spoil me. She used to completely spoil me. She used to appreciate. I remember that the first time I got hold of a video concert, it was Eagles' Hell Freezes Over. I actually went to my grandma and told her that, look at this thing, this is so beautiful. And I used to share, things with my grandma. And so after my 10th standard, after the 10th board exam, my grandma said that, okay, I'll buy you a keyboard. So I got my first Casio, which was a gift from my grandma, and I started teaching myself basically initially, because I had a basic understanding of scales, because I had learned Indian music for quite some time. So I had a basic understanding of scales. So I started by picking up songs. I would try to pick up everything that I would hear. The first song that I picked up was probably Everything I Do by Bryan Adams, and then followed by Summer of '69, and all those all those songs that we used to listen so dearly during our youth. So eventually when I got into college, so I joined the college band, and eventually I met a lot of new people who were like-minded, and eventually I started working towards being part of different bands, and things started happening.
So as I was just saying, Nabarun, the kind of keyboard that we have, that is a 20-year-old keyboard, and that is also that came from was a gift basically by my grandmother. So I think our grandmothers have spoiled us somewhere, and that's it's very important to have that support also, when you're kind of starting off.
Absolutely,
that's very important that support is there from the family itself. अगर वो नहीं होता कि I don't think that we'll be able to kind of do what we do, right?
True.
That initial, that push. So that's great to hear. So I also remember the reason that stuck to me, the reason I kind of asked you regarding that Indian kind of route is because we kind of did work. If you remember, Doordarshan में कुछ था ना?
Oh,
you
right,
remember?
Right. That was that Youth Adda. That was a chat show for budding musicians.
Yes. Yeah. So from there, most probably I had gone to your place also. So
right,
I remember that.
On our ground floor, there was this entire room filled with tanpuras and tablas and all those Indian instruments. Right.
From there.
Right.
So so finally the rock bug kind of hit you.
Yeah.
And you were working with Nishkromun. So Nishkromun, if I remember correctly, Nishkromun is you were there. Srirup was there. Shekhar.
Right.
Aro do teen jon chilo.
Atreyo was there, who's unfortunately not with us anymore. And Proshunda was the vocalist.
Okay.
Right.
So you started from there, and then you kind of got into.
Then I got into Lokayat.
Yeah. Okay.
With Raja and Shujoy. Korak was there.
Korak was
drums,
there. वहाँ पे भी हम लोग का jam हुआ था. Korak का I remember we had kind of done a lot of stuff.
Actually, that's one thing. We have grown up in a neighborhood which has a lot of musicians.
Right.
So that is something which has also contributed probably, because we didn't have to look very far to find like-minded people and like-minded friends who would want to jam, who were open to jamming. Because at that point of time, since music was not that readily available everywhere, so it was very necessary to have friends who would be like-minded people when it comes to music, because we used to share a lot of music. We used to share a lot of cassettes and CDs.
Right.
So
No, that is, I think that actually helped. The scene was actually very growing at that point of time,
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
helped a lot of musicians and to kind of do the things. So, what would you consider that kind of you were? And this is also a question I will kind of ask you to understand how you operate personally also. Like, when did you kind of decide that I have to do music? I will do music. So we are kind of fooling around with music. We are playing around with friends and everything. That's something else. But when did it occur, or like when did it actually kind of occur to you? कि मैं ये कर सकता हूँ full time and all that. I want to do this.
Yes, since my mother was a full-time professional musician, she had been very worried when I was becoming so serious with music that I was, cutting class to go for concerts or studio work. So she was starting to get a little worried because she could see the insecurity and the things that come with the profession. I mean, there's a lot of good things, but there are a lot of things that we don't really talk about the profession. Like things, one of the primary things is that the insecurity. You don't know that you can earn a lot of money on 1 month by doing a lot of gigs and a lot of studio projects probably, but the next month you might not have work because there might not be concerts happening, or you just might not have work. So that is something that is there. So my mother was very worried that if I choose music as a profession, then there's going to be a lot of issues. So initially she tried a lot that she tried to explain to me that do something which is conventional in terms of earning money, and do music parallelly, and that way you'll also get to do only the form of music that you like to do. So initially that was something that was in me, that probably I will do music as a side project and have some other job. So when I got into college, I was a part of various bands and I was playing a lot of gigs, doing a lot of shows. So towards the end of college, there was this time when campusing started happening. I was in presidency and I was studying English. So a lot of newspapers were coming in to recruit journalists and content writers. So I sat for an exam for a very renowned newspaper for the job of a sub-editor, and I also cracked the exam.
Wow.
But when the interview happened, then I was told that the job of the sub-editor would begin a little late in the day towards the evening, and you might have to work all night. So that is when it struck me that when am I going to rehearse then? When am I going to rehearse with the band? When am I going to make my own music? If I'm like working all evening and all night, and then the next day I'll be sleeping all day probably. So when am I going to make music? And especially it bothered me that the job is in the evening. So I eventually sort of shunned that off because I wanted to do music. And then I started thinking that what can I do so that I can continue doing music. So eventually I zeroed in on the profession of being a professor, of being a teacher. So because I also really loved what I was studying. I was absolutely loving studying literature in college. So I would love to teach, and in that way I would get the evenings free. This was the initial plan. So I did my masters, and I was also preparing for NET when the Anupam Roy band happened around 2010. Anupam his first song had released at that point of time, Amake Amar Moto Thakte Dao, which was a huge hit, and he was actually working in Bangalore at that point of time. He was a part of Texas Instruments, and he was there, and so he was starting to get a lot of gigs and a lot of work, a lot of music direction work as well. So he was looking to start a fresh band, who would be there with him throughout the live concert scenario, as well as be there with him in the studio for production of his songs. So that's when he got in touch with me, and we around 2010, around 2011, I remember, it was February 2011 that we did our first show. and eventually we started getting really close as band members, and chemistry started happening, and we started recording together and playing concerts together. All this while I was also teaching as a guest lecturer in a college.
Okay.
So parallelly I was doing music as per the plan and also studying for NET. Then Anupamda told me that why don't you start producing music, because you are into arrangement and you are into a bit of programming, so why don't you start producing music. Then you can also arrange some of my film music, and as a brand and a band we will have more credibility. So eventually I started making a little home setup and started producing music for Anupamda. So within 3 to 4 months I saw that I was getting so busy. With work, with studios, and also juggling shows at the same time, that all my CLs, all my leaves were slowly getting over in college. So one day, so after like teaching for around a year, I went to the college and gave my resignation, and that was the point that I realized that I would do only music for a living and nothing else, because see, this is something that I realized at that point. If you are doing studio work as well as live gigs, then it will get a little difficult for you to do something else. You might be also missing out on a lot of family gatherings and a lot of reunions and a lot of meeting up with friends, because you have already given all your time and all your focus to music. So that was the point, I think, around 2011, when I realized that I would not want to do anything else but music.
Okay. So how did it feel when you like put down the resignation? How did it feel?
Yeah, see, it definitely felt like, ending a chapter. But again, there's this line from a Bon Jovi song that every new beginning is some beginning's end. So that's what I thought at that point of time. So I thought okay, I'll give my best to this. I'll give my best to the music production, and I'll do what it takes to, become a better live musician. So yeah, that's that.
Okay. So we covered a lot in just in the beginning some of these questions. So I will pause and ask you some specific things I have in mind, or else once we get into the flow, we'll miss it out. So my first question would be, since you come from an English literature background, this is something I ask all my guests, that if there is any book, or if there are 2 to 3 books that you gift to people, what are those books and why? Maybe, or maybe if it's some book you won't even mention, you can kind of go ahead and do that. That's one thing, that since my childhood I have really loved to read. I was quite introverted as a kid. I did not have a lot of friends, and I was not a very good athlete. But I would read a lot. I would love to draw, and music was there. So since my childhood, I have been a huge fan of Satyajit Ray's writings. I mean, the entire world knows him as a filmmaker, but we all know that his short stories and his stories are amazing. They are a window to a lot more than they present themselves to be. And I was also in a school, Pathabhavan. Pathabhavan always encouraged a lot of reading, in storybooks especially. And Satyajit Ray was also a very intrinsic part of that entire ethos of Pathabhavan, because he was one of the first parents of Pathabhavan. Sandip Ray was one of the first students of the school, and the logo of Pathabhavan was also drawn by Satyajit Ray. So in our school there was this
these conversations regarding Satyajit Ray's stories used to happen a lot, and since my childhood I have been a huge fan of his writing. Many of his short stories like Ankesh Sir, Golapi Babu or Tipu, stories like Sadhon Babu's Shandeho or Khogom, for that matter, Ratan Babu or Shei Lokta, all these stories are amazing. And Feluda, obviously the entire Feluda series, since, as I said this, since I was more of an introvert as a child, Feluda had sort of become like a brother I never had, because you see, in those Feluda books you had a lot of information about a lot of things. If they would go to a place, there would be a lot of dialogue about that place where Feluda would explain that, and he was also a detective who was primarily written for children. So stories by Satyajit Ray, that's one of the primary influences, and I still do gift Satyajit Ray's books to a lot of people, a lot of my friends, a lot of juniors.
Okay.
The second book that has changed a lot of my perspectives, and it still keeps on changing perspectives, is the Mahabharata. I think this is something that everyone will agree to. Anyone who delves into the Mahabharata will agree to the fact that there is no end to delving into it. The more you delve into it, the more your perspectives change, and you start. So, the way it began, I would tell you. See, since when we are children, we are taught Mahabharata as very black and white. These characters are good, these characters are bad, and eventually we make our own judgments regarding that. But as you grow up, and if you delve into the books, like the first real the first detailed Mahabharata that I read was Rajshekhar Bosu's iteration, Mahabharata, the fat red book. So, and I eventually started realizing that the way it's been written, no characters are all bad or no characters are all good. There are a lot of gray happening over there. So you start hating a character because something he has done, but eventually the story progresses and something happens, then you start gaining empathy for that character also. So the book constantly encourages you to question your own perspectives and your choices, and which helps you to delve deep into your own understanding of things, which is very necessary, I would say. And eventually I started delving into the different adaptations of Mahabharata, like like Anand Nilakanthan's the two-part book, The Rise of Kali, and The Roll of the Dice and The Rise of Kali, where it's written from Duryodhan's perspective, or you have Palace of Illusions, where it's written from Draupadi's perspective. So the Mahabharata is something that's immensely interesting to me, and it's something that keeps on stimulating your brain cells if you think about it. So it has to be Mahabharata, one of the major influences for me. And another book that I would like to mention is Hamlet. Since I come from a literature background, we used to study a lot of Shakespeare in college, and Macbeth was obviously one of my favorite tragedies, but I read Hamlet much later when I was doing my masters. And Hamlet actually opened a window for me into the entire world of literary theory, and I started reading Kafka and Albert Camus, and tried to interpret Macbeth from a psychological as well as a political perspective, and so that's another book which keeps on stimulating your brain cells the more you think about it. So so I would say these are three of my major influences when it comes to reading.
Super. And if you see on your left, you'll see Upar mein there's the Mahabharata illustrated. Upar mein Mahabharata illustrated is there. Right. Obviously, the Mahabharata has a lot of influence in my life. Specifically, I will say the Gita. That is the...
Yeah, that's another thing I would love to mention. See, when this entire... Actually, I was in a very, very bad situation in my life at one point of time, and I had just chanced on the Gita one day. and the way it reads. A lot of people used to tell me that, if you read the Gita, Krishna speaks to you. So I actually realized that for the first time while reading it, that that it happens the way it just chanced to me. I mean, I don't know whether it was chance or something else, but I felt like I was Arjun in a battlefield, and I did not know what to do, and I did not know how to fight. And so the entire book felt like a counseling session for me. And that was the point when I realized that this is a part of a much later chapter of a much bigger story, which is the Mahabharata. And that was when I started delving into the Mahabharata from the very beginning and going deeper and deeper into it.
Super. So one more question now, since we are talking on this is getting interesting. So tell me, so do you consider yourself a spiritual person or a religious person specifically?
Yeah, I am a spiritual person. I cannot stress on the word religious much because this is something that I'll say it might be a little controversial, but religion is a more, I would say, a fictionalized version of spirituality. So the spiritual ethos is something, and when you're giving stories to the spiritual ethos, and when you're explaining it through stories and through certain characters, and you are thinking of those characters and those stories to be some kind of absolute in terms of your understanding of spirituality, probably that is religion, I would say. I would say I am a spiritual person.
Okay, super. Now coming a bit more specific, to music. So you are a music producer. Just out of curiosity, just wanted to know what kind of setup, as in what is your special DAW that you use for the people who are not aware of what is a DAW. That is a digital audio workstation, and what is your basic kind of a rig, if I can kind of understand. I'll get into bit of technicalities.
Yeah, sure. I totally work on Logic Pro X. I have also worked in Cubase for a pretty long time, but over the last 4 or 5 years I've been totally working with Logic. I have a Yamaha Montage and Korg Chrome as my 2 keyboards. And I have a Microbrute Arturia for some of my analog stuff. And my monitors are KRK Rocket 6. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Got the almost dream setup here. KRK. I love the KRKs. That is
even me.
Obviously great. So when you use Abhi, you're kind of using Logic. Now when you use Logic, are you using the kind of the samples in the Logic itself, or do you kind of work on Contact or Complete?
Yeah, I try to use everything that I get my hands on. I try to use everything. I use a lot of samples from Logic. I use a lot of live textures from my Montage and my Microbrute Arturia. I use Contact Player. I also use a few sample banks like Splice and Arcade.
Okay, so you use Splice. You're a regular user of Splice.
I have used Splice for some time, but then the subscription ended. Now I'm using Arcade for a few months, few months. So I pretty much use all the samples that I can get my hands on. So if it sounds good to me, I try to incorporate it.
Okay. So do you try to kind of, I'm just trying to understand, so what do you prefer more, since as a music producer, and this is a very specific question, as a music producer, what do you prefer more, since there's kind of availability of the vast kind of instruments or the sample libraries we have, to kind of do it yourself or everything, as in use these as your major kind of arsenal and work on it, or do you prefer kind of getting people to play live and working, as you're moving into the music director region also? So what is the preference?
See, it mostly depends on the kind of work that I am doing at that point of time, and it also depends on the budget to some extent.
Right.
So see, primarily the kind of sound that I really prefer is a very very smooth balance between the organic sound as well as the electronic digital sound. So I try even. It mostly depends on the kind of music that I'm creating at that point of the time. So very recently I made a track called Machine Gun, which is actually an old folk song, which has been recreated to so in this song we used a lot of diegetic sounds as well, like the sound of a gunshot, the sound of water dripping, the sound of sirens and cars and stuff, and chopping them up and creating some kind of chopping them up in the context of a dubstep kind of a soundscape. And at the same time using Indian instruments like khomok and dotala and srikhol with that. So that's a kind of experiment that I really like, creating a hybrid kind of a sound which is a good balance between the organic as well as the digital. And I really love recording musicians, because every time you're recording a musician, for even if it's for a song or a film score, that person is bringing something exclusive to the table. It's something that is being played only at that point of time, and it's exclusive. I mean, it's the real sound of human emotions, if you can put it that way. So I really love recording live musicians, and because it creates a sense of unique sound, but at the same time it depends on the kind of music that I am creating. But personally I am the current kind of music that I like to produce is a good balance between the organic as well as the digital.
Okay, makes sense. Talking on this, let's kind of talk about a project of yours that is not that mainstream. People obviously know you from Onum Roy's band, and the stuff you have done with Crystal Grass and all these things that you have done. But let's talk about your current project. That is, I'm talking about Professor. Let's kind of hear something about that.
So the Professor is a rap metal outfit. So I primarily write and handle the vocal duties in this band, and it's very much inspired by the bands that we grew up listening to, bands like Rage Against the Machine and Limp Bizkit, Linkin Park. And because I have always loved that sound, that alternative new metal kind of sound, and I always wanted to do something with it. So this happened sometime around 2014 or 15, I would say. I had been writing, sometimes I write lyrics. I mean, when I'm writing that, I don't really know, whether they will become songs one day or whether they will be just poems or something. But sometimes some lines come to me and I write them. So at that point of time, a lot of political turmoil was going on all over West Bengal, and whenever you were opening the news channels, there were news of rallies and people beating up people, and there was a lot of violence that was going on. So I had written a couple of songs, a couple of poems that had come to me at that point of time. So my friend, who's a drummer, Shondipon, I showed him those lines, and then eventually we started talking about it, and we started jamming on an idea that what if I delivered those poems as some kind of a rap metal song. So that's when the idea came about, and eventually we started making songs, and I started writing more within this soundscape. And then we eventually came up with the idea of wearing masks, because the lyrics as well as the kind of music that we were doing, we were stressing a lot on the idea of defamiliarization. I mean, showing things that in a not so familiar way. So that was another reason why we wanted to take up the masks, and the other reason was we were very much have always been influenced by Slipknot. That has always been there.
Okay.
So yeah, we brought some steampunk masks and we eventually started making songs. So we have an EP which is called Year One, which consists of all the songs we wrote during the first year of our existence.
Okay.
And a few new songs are also coming up this year. So let's see.
Okay, so we will be like waiting for that, kind of hearing you guys live, because I think always since an artist has many sides to it. So maybe your melodic side, your producer side has been kind of seen, but this would be kind of delving the kind of photos I have seen and a bit of the music. I think that that makes a lot of sense that you're kind of getting into that. वो भी होना चाहिए ना कहीं पे.
Yeah. That's a major part of me actually.
Yeah, so I think that is something I'm really kind of interested in looking forward to. So now what we'll do is that since we are talking about your alternate kind of projects, is there anything you want to kind of play to us? Anything right now? Just in the middle, do you want to kind of कोई गाना जो पूरा mainstream भी हो सकता है, doesn't matter, but something you want, since this is future Sound of Bengal.
Yeah, okay.
Something that.
Okay, I'll sing a little bit of a song that I wrote, 3-4 years back, I think.
Okay.
This is a song which interestingly, since we have been talking about the Mahabharata, this is a song I wrote right after reading Roll of the Dice and Rise of Kali, those two books by Anand Nilakanthan, which is Mahabharata from Duryodhan's perspective. So it's a very different kind of a Mahabharata that we have. It's stripped of all those magic elements and all. It's very hardcore political, since Duryodhan was kind of a guy who used to dismiss Krishna's magic as street magic. So it was a very hardcore political story, and it's very well written, of course. And something which the book presents really fascinated me, that we all grew up listening to the Pandava side of the story because they won the battle. So গল্প লিখবে তারা যারা যুদ্ধ জিতবে. The people who win the war, they are the people who write the stories, and those are the stories that stay documented. So that's something which sort of inspired me to write this song. যদি চরের ঘোরেতে আমি প্রলাপের ছলে ডাকি সত্যি কথার মতো, সন্ধে নামবে ঠিক সেখানেই যেখানে মানুষের ভয়। বাড়ি ফেরার রাস্তাগুলো যদি একটু একটু করে ধূসর রাত্রিবে বাঁক খেয়ে নেমে যায় মুখ লুকোতে করতে পাপক্ষয়। যদি বা খুঁজে পাও আমাকে ছুঁতে চাও, আমার এই অন্ধকারে আলো জেলো না তুমি। যদি বা ভুলে যাও গোপনে শুনে নাও, আমার এই অন্ধকার তুমি নিভতে দিও না। ও পাথরের কাজে রক্ত লেগেছে থাকে, গল্প লিখবে তারা যুদ্ধ জিতবে যারা, দৈনিক পাপী যুদ্ধ বিলাসী তাকে ভাববে মাহাত্ম। সাধারণ কোনো গল্প সন্ধে তবু জানবে না তোমার নাম বা গদ্য, তাই বস্তুপাতের চোখের চামড়ায় ঢাকবে লজ্জাকার। যদি বা কারণে বা ব্যাকরণে মনে পড়ে যাবে হাজার অভিমান, ও যদি বা খুঁজে পাও আমাকে ছুঁতে চাও, আমার এই অন্ধকার তুমি নিভতে দিও না। ও
Great man, great to hear it. Very nice rendition, very nice song. So we need to hear more of of singing part of you also. So I think Bobby is very important.
Yeah, I have been actually releasing a few singles this year. One of them has come out already.
Okay.
And I am planning to release a few more songs this year with the Professor. Those are rap metal songs, and also some non-metal songs from myself. Those are scheduled to come out this year. Maybe towards the end of March or April we'll release the first track.
Okay, so with that, what we'll do is that we'll take a short break and we'll end our first part, and once we come back we'll have the part 2 of Nabarun's episode or future Sound of Bengal. A lot of questions, I'm sure. Jam एक session तो और भी चाहिए, one more kind of thing, and yeah, we'll come back with a quick break. Thanks.